Okay, let's unpack this. There's a statistic that's, frankly, quite shocking.
Which one is that?
A child under 18 commits suicide every 40 minutes in India.
Wow. Every 40 minutes? That's incredibly stark.
It really is. And it tells us immediately we're dealing with some really serious challenges facing young people today.
Absolutely. It forces you to ask what's going on.
Exactly. And that's what we want to dive deep into now. We're looking at some thought-provoking insights, actually sparked partly by a web series called Adolescence.
Right, I heard about that. It depicted some pretty intense teenage violence, didn't it?
It did, and it really prompted some reflection on, well, the pressures adolescents are under.
Makes sense. And for you listening, if you're someone keen on understanding the world's complexities.
Yeah, then this is really crucial. It's not just about scary numbers, though they are alarming. It's about getting to grips with these bigger shifts, in society, in technology.
And how they all intersect to create this unique pressure cooker for teenagers.
Precisely. So we'll be exploring things like social media's impact, changes in parenting, shifting norms, how it all affects their well-being.
It's fascinating and maybe a bit worrying how media, like that series, can just crystallize these issues that were maybe bubbling under the surface.
It brings it right out into the open.
And as you said, for our listener, it's about understanding those underlying currents. One of the first things that jumps out is this feeling that adolescence itself is compressed.
Compressed, how do you mean?
Like kids are bumping up against adult themes, adult situations much, much earlier than previous generations.
Right, right. Everything seems accelerated.
And tied into that, this idea of relationships becoming, well, transactional.
Transactional, I mean friendships, romantic relationships.
Both, yeah. It's this sense that connections are based more on what you get out of it, like an exchange, almost quid pro quo.
Okay.
And if those sort of unspoken expectations aren't met, things can turn sour really fast. Friends become enemies, lovers become haters, that kind of extreme shift.
And this is happening when, emotionally, they're just not equipped for it yet.
Exactly. That's the crucial part. Physically, they might be maturing faster, but emotionally, mentally, that stability, that resilience, that takes years to build.
So they're in these complex social situations without the emotional tools.
Pretty much. Think about how media often shows relationships very possessive, like, she is mine.
Yeah, that trope is everywhere.
So a 13-year-old absorbs that, right? And then if reality doesn't match that narrative, maybe the person they like doesn't reciprocate in the way they expect.
They react badly.
They might go ballistic, as the source material put it. It's an extreme reaction fueled by an immature understanding of relationships, often shaped by these media portrayals.
I mean, most adults have probably felt intense disappointment, maybe even a flash of wanting to, metaphorically destroy something when hurt.
Sure, fleetingly, perhaps. But hopefully we've developed the brakes, the control mechanisms.
Right, mechanisms adolescents are still developing.
Precisely. They lack that practiced self-regulation, which really underscores how important guidance is during these years.
Okay, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And it leads perfectly into this next point, which feels huge. Where are kids getting their guidance from now?
Well, the shift is pretty dramatic if you look across generations.
How so?
Let's take the speaker's father's generation as an example. Back then, parents were the main influence, maybe 70%.
70.
Yeah. School, maybe 20%. Friends, social circles, much smaller, perhaps 5, 10%.
Okay, and then for the next generation, the speaker's own.
That parental influence dropped, maybe down to 40, 50%. Books, movies, cinema became more significant influencers, maybe 20, 30%. Teachers, perhaps a bit less influential than before.
Interesting. So what about today's kids, particularly in, say, urban areas?
It's a completely different picture, parental influence. Estimated down at maybe 10 to 15%.
Only 10, 15. That's a massive drop.
It is. And grandparent influence, often near zero, especially in cities. School influence is still there, maybe 10, 15%.
So where's the rest coming from? What's filling that gap?
Social media, the online world, that's become the dominant force for many.
Right. And the implication there is...
Yeah.
Well, it's concerning, isn't it?
It really is, because the primary influencers shift from people who genuinely care about the child, parents, family, maybe teachers, to, well, often commercial forces.
Whose main goal isn't the child's well-being.
Not primarily, no. Their driver is often engagement, clicks, ultimately profit, not necessarily healthy development.
Which brings us to this idea of unattended children.
Yeah, that phrase really hits home. The point was made that something like 90% of human behavior is learned, picked up.
Usually from parents, mentors. the people closest to us.
Right. But if parents have maybe only 10–15% of that influence bandwidth,
Yeah.
and they're also stretched thin with work, their own lives.
Then there's just less time, less energy for that direct guidance.
Exactly. It's the reality for many families. So where do kids turn?
Online.
To the internet, to social
Yeah.
media, for connection, information, maybe even validation.
But that online world, it's a bit of a Wild West, isn't it?
It can be. You've got great educational stuff, sure, but also a ton of potentially harmful content. And crucially, it's often delivered by people or algorithms with zero personal investment in that specific child.
There's no care there. No love, as was mentioned.
That lack of a loving, caring connection is fundamental. There was this analogy used about dogs becoming wild without human contact.
Interesting comparison.
While you can debate the specifics between species, the core idea holds. That need for positive interaction, for guidance rooted in genuine care. It's vital for healthy development.
So if kids are left sort of emotionally untended, without that consistent loving guidance.
We shouldn't be surprised if we see some negative outcomes. It makes sense, unfortunately.
And thinking about India specifically, while maybe family ties are still traditionally strong in places.
That's changing, isn't it? Especially in cities, the societal fabric is shifting.
Yeah, it feels like some of the trends India is seeing now, they echo what happened in the West maybe a generation or two ago.
Where issues like social isolation, adolescent challenges became much more pronounced. It's a similar pattern unfolding, perhaps accelerated by technology.
And it just brings us right back to that horrifying statistic.
Yeah.
A child suicide every 40 minutes in India. It's the human cost.
It truly is. And it forces us to question our priorities as a society.
Oh.
There was this argument presented that challenged the whole idea that we need more kids just to fuel the economy.
Right, questioning that economic imperative.
Exactly. Is economic growth the ultimate goal, even if it comes at the cost of well-being for the generations we already have and the ones to come?
It's this idea that structuring human life purely around economics is, well, the word used was madness.
Yeah. Economics should serve human comfort, human well-being, not the other way around.
But this constant drive for profit, the work culture it creates,
Yeah.
that means parents are working longer hours, they're stressed.
And the result, the next generation is left unattended. Not necessarily physically, but emotionally, developmentally.
Which loops back to technology's role in all this.
Right. The core issue isn't technology itself. It's a tool. Or it should be.
But we haven't quite figured out how to use it purely for well-being, have we?
We often haven't. There's this almost childish excitement with every new platform, every new app, like Facebook arrives and everyone jumps on, then the next thing and the next.
Without maybe stopping to think about the real impact, especially on kids.
Yeah, this sort of wholesale adoption without critical thought. There was mention of Australia trying something, right? About social media for under 16s.
Yes, described as a bold step, trying to put some safeguards in place.
Which signals a growing awareness, at least, that maybe kids aren't equipped to navigate this digital world entirely alone.
There's a hope, I suppose, that eventually society will mature in its relationship with technology.
That's a hope expressed, yeah. That we'll become more discerning, choosing what serves us rather than being consumed by everything new.
But there was also a pretty stark warning attached to that hope.
Indeed. The acknowledgement that reaching that maturity might take decades, maybe 30, 40 years.
And in that time,
In that interim period, there's potential for significant damage, for real human cost, even loss of life. It's not a problem that's just going to fix itself overnight.
no, it definitely requires conscious effort. So just to kind of pull these threads together as we wrap up,
Yeah, let's recap.
for you listening, we've talked about this earlier, exposure for teens, the rise of these transactional relationships.
That huge shift in influence away from parents towards social media and commercial forces.
Right. And this ongoing struggle to use technology wisely as a tool for well-being, not as something that leaves kids feeling disconnected or unattended.
And the human cost, that suicide statistic, is a tragic reminder of the stakes.
So hopefully for you, wanting to understand these deeper forces, this gives a more nuanced picture of the challenges adolescents face today.
It's not just one thing, is it? It's this complex mix of societal shifts, technology, changing family dynamics, all hitting at once.
Exactly. So here's a final thought to leave you with. Given these really powerful forces shaping young minds, commercial interests, algorithms, peer pressure amplified online, what happens long term?
What are the societal implications if we don't consciously, actively push back?
Yeah, if we don't prioritize genuine connection, emotional well-being, mindful tech use
Mm,
over just, the economy or the next big app?
it's a critical question.
Maybe reflect on your own media use, your own tech habits, and think about the ripple effect, especially on the younger people in your life, something to definitely mull over.